Arizona was built off the backs of many who died with their boots on. It lays claim to many of our nation's most compelling histories of the Old West. In its time, the region has seen many dramas played out by some of the biggest names of the age. Cochise, Geronimo, the Earps, Doc Holliday. The list is a long one. Back in the day, people flocked to the territory for the promise of riches and a better life. Many towns arose, often where precious metals like gold, silver, and copper were found. For many decades, the people worked, drank, murdered, prostituted, all of the stuff you'd expect of a proper Old West setting. And for various reasons, the old industries faded. All across the territory, places came and went. Some burnt to the ground or relocated, and many of them have been lost to time. But if you know where to look, Arizona has some towns with Old West roots that are still standing. On today's episode, join us as we explore 3 Arizona ghost towns that are too tough to die. We'll explore Bisbee and the industry that created one of the grandest towns west of the Mississippi, and of course no tour of Old West towns would be complete without visiting Tombstone. We'll end with one of our personal favorites, a now artsy little town built on a mountainside named Jerome. Alright partners, let's saddle up and head out. Did you know southeastern Arizona has a town that was once a beacon of culture and prosperity in the Old West? And it's also known for one of the greatest massacres in Arizona's Old West history, generating a higher body count than even the famed shootout at the OK Corral. Okay, we'll get to that, but first let's explore the origins of this great western town. Bisbee, Arizona has its roots as far back as the 1870s. In 1877, some U.S. Army scouts were tracking down some renegade Apaches in the area, and a tracker noticed signs of mineralization on some of the rocks in the area. Some mining claims were made, and in short order, it didn't take long before the area was flooded with prospectors and Bisbee was on the map. Back when Bisbee was still mostly made of wood, and just a couple years after the Earps and Doc Holliday threw down at the OK Corral, another Old West shootout occurred on the streets of nearby Bisbee. Known today as the Bisbee Massacre, on December 8th of 1883, 6 armed outlaws decided to rob the mining payroll they thought was being stored at the town's general store, which used to be located where the modern Let's Inn Loft Hotel stands today. When the town citizens started to notice something was up, all hell broke loose as 2 of the armed sentries standing guard outside began to fire upon the citizens of the town. By the time it was over, the members of the gang killed 5 innocents, including a lawman and pregnant woman. We'll follow up with what happened to the outlaws when we head up to Tombstone in a bit. It didn't take long before the town's original wood structures were replaced by many of the beautiful brick structures we see today. By the early 1900s, Bisbee had become the largest city in Arizona. By 1910, about 20,000 people called Bisbee home. It even had a fancy trolley system that was very popular with the residents. Bisbee had one of the longest runs in mining of Arizona towns, which lasted into the 1970s. Today, evidence of Bisbee's mining history is all around, including a modern pit mining operation virtually right in town. Today, visitors can immerse themselves in the history. For one, you can book a night in one of many historic hotels, many of which are reputed to be haunted. One of our favorites was a stay at the Inn at Castle Rock, an old miners' hotel dating back to the late 1800s, which sits near the very spring the original scouts saw the mineralization that spawned Bisbee's mining industry. Today it's the site of Apache Springs Well, an old mine shaft that ended up flooding, and the inn is built directly on top of it. If you're a fan of the paranormal, many locations like the inn have interesting ghost stories attached. We might have experienced a bump or two in the night during our time there, and old Geronimo didn't seem too impressed with a city slicker like me. One of the most interesting things we did in Bisbee was to check out the mining history by taking a trip 1,500 feet deep into the Queen Mine. At the Queen Mine, you can ride a train deep into the old mine shafts and stopes while you learn what it was like working in there. This was bar none the best mine tour we've ever taken. Just make sure you can deal with tight spaces. If mining and history is not your thing, modern Bisbee has much to offer in terms of art, music, food, and more. Just walking the charming streets of today is good enough for some. And if you like Bisbee, then we know you'll love Tombstone, our next stop, which is actually less than a 30-minute drive down the road from Bisbee. Alright, this next one likely needs no introduction. I mean, who hasn't heard of the famous shootout at the OK Corral, popularized by Hollywood cinema? Tombstone is another historic Arizona town whose motto is actually "The Town Too Tough to Die." And just like its contemporary Bisbee, Tombstone was a town built around mining, drinking, gambling, greed, and plenty of murder. To start, visitors can stand on the same ground where Wyatt Earp, two of his brothers, and Doc Holliday shot it out with the Clanton and McLowrys. Perhaps for many, the OK Corral is the main reason to visit this town. And we agree, it's fascinating and fun, albeit a little touristy. But would you be surprised if we told you that the gunfight site is not at the top of our list for favorite historic spots in this town? There's much more history to find if you know where to look. But to examine it, let's rewind to the beginning of Tombstone's history. Tombstone's roots are in 1879 when prospector Ed Schieffelin made a discovery of silver in the area. Schieffelin was an Army scout and looking for precious metals in the region, and one of his peers, Al Sieber, is reported to have told Ed, "The only rock you'll find out there is your tombstone." Well, the rest, as they say, is history. Just outside of town today, you can find a memorial to Ed Schieffelin, his actual final resting place. Schieffelin died in Oregon, but his body was brought back here and he was buried in traditional miner's clothing, complete with a pickaxe and canteen. Let's now travel inside the town that Schieffelin's discovery began and see what other history we can find. One of the challenges with old towns like Tombstone is that a lot of the original wooden buildings from the era are no more, as they were destroyed in fires. Here's a picture of Tombstone after a devastating fire in 1882. Note that at the OK Corral, all that was left standing was the sign. Next door, the original C.S. Fly studio, the building abutting the lot where the famous shootout occurred, was also destroyed, but today they reconstructed this area, along with many others across town. So what of purely original buildings of the era then? Are there any left? Fortunately, there are, and one of our favorites is the Birdcage Theater, which opened its doors in December of 1881. Inside, you can take a self-guided tour of the theater, peruse a variety of era relics, some of which make very bold claims. You get to go backstage and see the hearse that delivered much of the dead up the road at the Boot Hill Cemetery, and even go into the basement where you can see where one of the longest running poker games in history was played that lasted over 8 years. There are even old rooms down there that you can peek in, still in their Victorian state, where prostitutes would conduct their trade. Admittedly, we've struggled verifying things in Tombstone, even in the Birdcage, for documented historical accuracy, but if you like your history served from a validated source, then we would suggest a visit to the old Tombstone Courthouse, constructed in 1882. It's a museum and state park with much on display to see. And you remember those really bad guys I mentioned responsible for the botched robbery and murder of innocents in Bisbee? Well, all of those guys were eventually caught and ended up here at the courthouse and were hanged, all except for one. One of the men found to be involved with the crime but not directly involved in the violence was a guy named John Heath. Because the prosecution had a tougher time tying Heath to the crime, he received a lesser sentence than the rest. Life in Yuma Territorial Prison, which some might argue was a worse fate than death. But alas, the good people of Tombstone would have none of it, and a lynch mob extracted Heath from the jail and hung him on a telegraph pole on the streets of Tombstone in February of 1884. C.S. Fly, the well-known photographer we mentioned earlier, took a picture here of the lynching. Today you could see the remains of the very telegraph pole from which Heath was hanged. And then in March, the remaining members of the massacre were all hanged at the courthouse on a specially made gallows. All of the men, including Heath, were buried in the famous Boot Hill Cemetery, but Heath's body was eventually removed and relocated to Texas into an unmarked grave, but the other men remained. And speaking of Boot Hill, this is another stop on a Tombstone visit that we never miss. While we question the accuracy of some of the headstones, this lot is where many of the less desirable elements of society ended up getting buried. This was not the good people's cemetery, it's where many of the murdered as well as the murderers ended up, being buried with their boots on, as it's said in these parts. And perhaps the most famous residents here at Boot Hill are the losers of the shootout at the OK Corral, Billy Clanton, brother to Ike Clanton, and 2 other brothers, Frank and Tom McClowery. You can visit their graves at Boot Hill today, along with many others thought to be murdered here in Tombstone. So hopefully you can see underneath a modern town's touristy exterior is a rich history that you can unpack for yourself. We didn't cover all of our favorite spots here in Tombstone in this short summary, but you can watch our many other videos if you'd like a more in-depth look at any of these locations. Tombstone is a must-see for any fan of Old West history, and we will be back many times to visit this famous little town that's too tough to die. Our final stop on our tour of living Arizona ghost towns is a unique place and another historic town that mining put on the map. Just like one of its sister towns, Bisbee, Jerome was a major producer of copper in the late 1800s into the 1900s. Jerome is located in north-central Arizona, several hours away from the first 2 locations, very near to beautiful Sedona. It's built onto a steep mountainside and it almost defies gravity, except when gravity has its way. Jerome faces the Verde Valley and sits at about 5,000 feet above sea level. It is here in the late 1800s where some of the richest copper ore deposits ever found began to be extracted from these hills. Being a mining town with roots in the late 1800s, and like our first 2 stops, Jerome had its share of saloons, shady ladies, and inequities. You can walk the streets where the red light district once was, and around town you may spot an old brothel or 2. While most could walk the windy, steep streets of Jerome and window shop, enjoy the artsy community of today, all while knowing nothing of the town's history, this is the Cactus Atlas, and that just doesn't sit well with us. For that reason, if it's your first visit to Jerome, you need to visit Jerome Historic State Park, located inside the former mansion of James S. Douglas, one of the mining elite of the era. In the museum, you'll learn all about the minerals of the area, as well as what was happening above and below ground. Jerome's roots are in the late 1800s, but its most productive and profitable years were in the early 1900s. Mining was good to Jerome for many years, but by the 1930s, when copper prices significantly dropped, it was the beginning of the end of Jerome's heyday. Some operations continued at limited capacity as far into the 1950s, but for the most part, Jerome had seen its day and eventually shifted from being a mining town to a quaint historic town great for tourists, all of which you'll learn about at the mansion. Our favorite thing to see here is not in the mansion, but just down the hill at the Audrey Shaft. To find it, just look for a wooden head frame, which happens to be the largest wooden head frame left standing in Arizona. Under the head frame, you'll find a clear plexiglass viewing window that provides a view directly down into the shaft, which is about 1,900 feet deep. That's 650 feet taller than the highest point of the Empire State Building. You can walk over the abyss or even lay on it if you prefer, but we'll warn you, this is not for the faint of heart. Every time I step over that pit, I get the tingles in my neck. It's a long way down. Now, equipped with your quick education of mining in the area, it's time to hit the streets of Jerome. Virtually every building you see here has age to it. The history is everywhere. Some of the old hotels and businesses have fared well over the years, and others, like Jerome's famous sliding jail, have been making a slow journey to the bottom of the valley. Jerome's famous sliding jail. It actually used to be up the hill, and like I told you, things were so steep here, it literally slid down the hill. One of the aspects of Jerome we like best is seeing the well-preserved buildings next to the frames of buildings that once were. One of our favorite historic buildings here is the old Liberty Theater, easily recognizable by its tall, narrow facade. The Liberty Theater is a time capsule. The theater was completed in 1918, and with a delayed opening due to the Spanish flu, the theater operated into the 1930s, when records show it was shut down for its original purpose. I can tell you, walking in this place alone and in the dark was quite an experience. Nothing creepy happened, but there's a feeling and smell in the air that almost takes you back to another time, where the people would have dressed and talked a bit differently than we do today. The Liberty Theater is definitely our favorite time capsule in this town, although we still have many more to visit here. There's also a fun and quirky side you could find here in Jerome at the Gold King Mine and Ghost Town, which has many amazing relics and a few buildings related to mining. But we would not call this a full-fledged ghost town. They never even really had a mine here, but just a prospector shaft which has been plugged. It's more akin to an organized junkyard, but it is fun and a very popular spot you can check out during your visit. And I know we're just scratching the surface here with Jerome, but our main goal is to get you oriented and pointed in the right direction. From there, you'll have many other paths to explore and discoveries to make in this quaint historic mining town. Okay, my friends, there you have it. 3 amazing historic mining towns in Arizona that are too tough to die. Bisbee, Tombstone, and Jerome. All amazing time capsules that provide us a glimpse into one of America's favorite periods of history, the Old West. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe and use the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. And of course, share and tell a friend. The more of you there are to inform and entertain, the more likely you'll see us for years to come. This is by no means the last you'll see of these amazing historic towns on our channel, and we very much look forward to our next historic adventure. Take care, and see ya on the next one.